Coming up, what constitutes a successful season for the Nets? Will Brooklyn have multiple first-round picks in its starting lineup? Is Sean Marks' job in jeopardy? I'll answer all those fan questions and more after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. And on today's show, it's Fan Take Friday, last one of the year before the start of the regular season. I took questions from listeners on the Nets rookies, how Jordi Fernandez will craft the rotation, Sean Marks, and more. So getting right into it, rolling on through your questions and takes. First question, do you see Ben Suraf or Nolan Traore and Yegor Dioman in the starting lineup? I don't personally see that. The Nets having, multiple of these rookie point guards in the lineup at the same time. And I think the reason you asked the question is because a lot of people obviously have the idea that Yegor isn't necessarily a point guard and he can play the wing. And I think that is true. I think out of the gate, though, if healthy and at full strength, I would expect him to be the Nets starting point guard. So that's how I'm seeing it right now. But as the season progresses, I think that Yegor's ability to be, multi-positional, to be versatile, to do some of those other things off the ball if his three-point shot is falling, I think that's a big part of what attracted the Nets to Yegor throughout the pre-draft process. So as the season progresses, I would definitely expect to see lineups where Ben Suraf or Nolan Traore are in the lineup at point guard, and then Yegor Dioman is playing off the ball on the wing. Like, I think that, we've talked throughout the pre-draft process and after it, Sean Marks has spoken about the Nets being confident that all of these guys, not all of them, but that a lot of them are going to be able to share the floor together. And there's obviously been a lot of outcry, a lot of criticism about, all the Nets selecting all of these guys, all these first-round picks that need the ball necessary, that all of these, international point guards. And you look at it, in my opinion, I feel like that's kind of a calculated thing that they did. That they view that as a strength. Like, I talked to Jordi Fernandez about this at Summer League, and he said that the NBA is, trending in a direction where having multiple ball handlers, having multiple guys who can attack off the dribble and do these certain things on the floor together is a strength, and that's a positive. Now, obviously, you need to have guys who are big enough and can do enough things off the ball where they can play those off-ball positions and be effective there as well. So the Nets are really looking at this as they have a lot of these guys who are multi-positional and versatile. And I think Yegor Dioman headlines that group, whereas Ben Suraf and Nolan Traore are probably close to, point guards due to them, being best with the ball in their hands and also their shooting limitations. I think Yegor, with his size, with his connective playmaking, with his shooting, if it stays at the level that the Nets hope that it's going to be at, that lends itself to him being able to play off the ball a little bit more. In that case, while I think he'll start the year at point guard if he's full strength in the starting lineup, as the year progresses, I would definitely expect to see lineups where Yegor is sharing the floor with Nolan Traore or Ben Suraf, as we saw at Summer League. So that's how I'm seeing that. Next question. For the sake of a few fans who see things the old school way, break down by position who's starting at point guard, shooting guard, small forward, etc., and who are the backup players for each position. An extra question, will Yegor be a point guard or a wing? I just answered the Yegor part, but on the question of the Nets rotation, Jordi Fernandez has had a lot of questions directed at him about how are the Nets going to fit all of these rookies? How are they going to get minutes for all these guys? And Jordi has said that the Nets are probably going to go 10 deep, during the regular season for much of the year. And I think looking at this Nets roster right now entering training camp, obviously there's a few things that need to be hashed out in terms of cuts, but I see probably 9 guys who are locked into the rotation right now, in my opinion, to start the year. And those guys at point guard, you have Yegor Dioman and Ben Suraf, if Yegor is healthy. I think that those two guys, that's the 1-2 at point guard, in my opinion. Shooting guard, you have Cam Thomas. Behind that is a question. We'll get into that. But then small forward, you have Terrence Mann, Zaire Williams. Power forward, Michael Porter Jr., Noah Clowney. And center, Nick Claxton, Day'Ron Sharpe. That's 9 guys. So I would expect that to be 9 guys who are in the rotation from the beginning of the year. And then that backup shooting guard position. And look, like the NBA is positionless, is trending more towards being positionless than ever before. But you asked for like a positional breakdown. So that backup shooting guard spot, that's the spot where I think there are some questions. And I think you have a few guys who could fill that. You have obviously Drake Powell, the Nets rookie first round pick, the only like non-ball handler that they brought in. I have heard from people that you should expect Powell to spend some time in the G League early in the year. Now, could that change? That could definitely change. We saw him spend time with the Nets second unit during, one of those preseason matchups against the Phoenix Suns. But you have Drake Powell. You have Tyrese Martin, who, everybody has raved about during the offseason and into training camp. He obviously is competing for the final roster spot with Jalen Wilson, but I definitely think he would be in contention, for those backup shooting guard minutes. And you also have Haywood Highsmith, who I wouldn't say is necessarily a shooting guard. Like, he's more of a forward, but he's like a 6'5", 6'6" guy, like in that wing mold. So those are the guys I would see behind Cam Thomas. Haywood's obviously recovering from that offseason knee surgery. He said he plans to be ready for the start of the regular season, but he hasn't done anything yet. We're a week away from the opener. I don't expect him to be ready. So to open the year, you have those 9 guys that I said, and then you have Drake Powell and, Tyrese Martin behind Cam Thomas at that shooting guard spot. And it'll be interesting to see, how that plays out. And obviously, like, Jalen Wilson has to be, factored into the equation, but he's more of like a wing power forward. And I wouldn't expect him to, I'm kind of going under the assumption that Tyrese Martin is going to get that final roster spot. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it right now. Next question. If the Nets overperform and miss out on a top 10 pick, let's say they get pick number 11 in 2026, but they have 2 rookies on the all-rookie team, one first team in the Rookie of the Year conversation, and one second team with a clear future in the league, would that be a success or a failure? That's a very detailed question. I would say that if the Nets get the number 11 pick in this year's draft, I would say that that is definitely a failure, because they have set things up, I think, to have a better shot at getting a top pick than they did last year based on some of the offseason moves that they made. And that makes sense given the fact that they got the number 8 pick last year. They traded 4 first-round picks to the Houston Rockets to get back their 2025 and 2026 first-rounders. And one of those 4 picks was the Phoenix Suns 2025 first-rounder. And the Nets ended up number 8, and that Phoenix pick ended up number 10. So there wasn't that much of a payoff early on. So if they get pick number 11 in this year, that trade is going to look really, really bad. And obviously there's lottery luck, but for them to get pick 11, they would have to fall, they'd have to do even better than they did this past season in terms of the NBA standings. So that would obviously be a failure. But if they have a player in the Rookie of the Year conversation, presumably Yegor Dioman, and they have another one who's second team all rookie, that would be a major success. So I don't think that those things are necessarily, linked. I think that they could be viewed separately. One of those things would be a big failure. One of those things would be a big success. But if they have a player who plays that well, and, 2 players who play that well, that obviously, even if they got pick number 11, that would be really encouraging. But I would expect that, this is the last chance that the Nets have to get like one of these really like superstar or star level draft prospects, I think, for quite some time. And there is quite a few of them in the top of this draft, and Darren Peterson, AJ DeBansta, and Cam Boozer. So I would expect them to be in on, trying to maximize their draft lottery position. We've seen them do that already. And, if some of these rookies play absolutely unbelievable, that could obviously derail that, but I don't think that that is all too likely of an outcome right now. Next question. Do you know how involved Jordi Fernandez was in the draft process? When you asked him about Saraf, he specifically mentioned watching his Euro Cup games and really talked up how he played like a pro at 18 years old. Yeah, like this has been a big this was a big topic, entering the draft and after the draft, the kind of synergy and the collaboration between the Nets front office and the Nets coaching staff. And there's always going to be that in any draft process, because obviously, like, you need to have a vision for these guys that you draft of how they're going to be utilized with the coaching staff that you have. So that's always happens. But I feel like, this Nets coaching staff was particularly involved. Like, while it always happens, there's sometimes a separation of the labor, like the front office does this, the coaches do that. And, I think we saw that this Nets front office was really involved in the pre-draft process. They did have a lot of input. They were in the player interviews. They were talking to these guys, getting to know them. So I do think that there was a good level of collaboration between Sean Marks and that front office and Jordi Fernandez and this coaching staff. And I think that that's a positive. And I think that that should be viewed as a good thing, especially going into another draft where the Nets are going to try to have a really high pick and a really important decision. Last question before a break. Is Drake Powell going to be used mostly as a spot-up shooter on offense, or is he going to be allowed to make plays while on ball like he did in the preseason? I mean, he's going to be used as a spot-up shooter. Like, that's going to be his role. He's, obviously very limited from a ball handling perspective, from, being able to do some things on the second side, from, being a decision maker off the bounce. Like, those are things that he did not excel at during his freshman season in North Carolina. And that's why he had the lowest usage rate of a wing to ever be drafted in the first round. So those are obviously weaknesses. Is he going to be allowed to make plays while on the ball? Like, yeah, like he's not going to be precluded from doing that stuff. Like, I think that the Nets are going to want Drake to develop. I think he'll spend some time in Long Island. And then when he gets up to the NBA, he'll be allowed to do a lot of things and experiment with his game and try to improve. Now, I think the better question is, what positions are the Nets going to put him in? Are they going to put him in positions where he's running these zoom actions, where he's doing things where he's handling the ball and he's getting downhill? And I could see that in spurts. Do I think it's the thing that he's going to be doing the most? Probably not, because I just don't think that he has the requisite skills to do it right now. But the only way to do it, the only way to get better at it, is by doing it. I think that's where Long Island comes in. And when he's up in the NBA, I think he'll be used as a spot-up shooter. But I also think that the Nets are definitely going to put him in positions where he can work on these things and he can try to get better, even if it's not at a huge, expansive rate. I think that he will get to do those things. And that's going to be the whole point of this year, is development. So we'll see how that plays out. But we got more questions, a lot about Sean Marks. Is his future in jeopardy with Brooklyn? Also, what trades could he potentially be looking to make during this regular season? So we'll get into all that and more when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Wayfair. Guys, the holidays are going to be here before you know it, which is exciting, but getting your home ready for guests and celebrations can feel like a lot. Maybe your serveware needs a refresh or your guest room could use new bedding. Wayfair has everything you need to get your home holiday ready. From Christmas tree wreaths to bedding, cookware, and outdoor inflatables, it's your one-stop shop for every room in the house. Guys, Wayfair makes it easy to personalize your home for the holidays with a huge selection for every style and budget. And with free and easy delivery, even on the big stuff, you can get everything you need without the hassle of huge delivery fees. Guys, I love Wayfair. I recently ordered some new holiday decor from the site, and it completely transformed my living room. The wreaths and throw pillows instantly made the space feel warm and festive. I love how easy it was to find pieces that fit my style and budget. Everything was in one place, and the checkout was a breeze. The delivery is fast and free, which was a lifesaver during the busy time of year. Now, instead of stressing about getting the house ready, you can actually enjoy the holidays with friends and family. So get organized, refreshed, and ready for the holidays for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair. Every style, every home. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, this Fan Take Friday, rolling on through all of your takes and questions. Next one. Do you think there's any appetite to trade Terrence Mann and Michael Porter Jr.? Do the Nets decision makers want several veteran players on the roster, or if teams call with future draft picks, will the Nets move them? I think those two might be targets of contenders at the trade deadline. Yeah, if a team calls with, offering up like draft picks for Terrence Mann or Michael Porter Jr., it will depend which draft picks, but I definitely think that the Nets will entertain it. Like, any veteran on this roster who doesn't necessarily fit the timeline is going to be a trade candidate. We'll see that with Terrence Mann, Michael Porter Jr. I think Nick Claxton obviously will enter that conversation. Definitely Haywood Highsmith if he gets healthy. So all of those guys are going to be trade candidates. What is the right trade? In a guy like Terrence Mann's case, like, if somebody is willing to give you an expiring contract and take on his deal, and the Nets can just clear that off their books while removing a veteran from the equation, like, almost regardless of whether or not you get a draft pick, that could make that worth it. Now, if they're willing to do that and they're willing to give you like a second round pick or something like that, I definitely see that as viable. Porter Jr., if somebody's willing to, take that contract and give you draft assets and compensation, I definitely think the Nets will look into that. I don't know how likely that is. It'll depend on, how he performs early this season. I also think that if the Nets want to get into the Giannis Antetokounmpo conversation, if another star becomes available, his contract is going to be the main salary filler that would be used in that deal. But the Nets also have Nick Claxton, so they could, fill that salary other ways. But I think, if somebody calls and is willing to take on these Terrence Mann or Michael Porter Jr. contracts and potentially give assets for them, I definitely think the Nets are going to entertain that, especially in Terrence Mann's case. Like, if they could just get off that deal, I think that would be a positive. Then for Porter Jr., they might be holding out some more hope that he could play well and revitalize his value and actually get them something in return. So we'll see how that plays out. Next question: is there a path to Cam Thomas getting an extension during the season, in your opinion? If he is dropping 25 points and 5 assists a night at decent efficiency, he may impact winning even with the rookie point guards in place to ensure a horrible record. Or is that his ticket out of town? So, I've been pretty clear that I think that the Cam Thomas Nets relationship has run its course. I just think that, when you make that decision on a player the way that the Nets did this offseason and you risk him taking the qualifying offer, which he ultimately did, or you put him in a position where he felt his best option was taking the qualifying offer, that kind of just signals that he isn't really a priority for you. So for me, one of two things was going to have to change for Cam Thomas to get an extension with the Nets. Either the Nets are going to have to get much higher on Cam Thomas to where they're meeting the contract demands that he, was reportedly seeking, which was a contract approaching, $30 million per year annually. Either that has to happen or Cam Thomas has to come really far down on his asking price to meet where the Nets are at. They could obviously meet in the middle, but I don't really see that as all that likely. Like, could Cam do things to sway them? Maybe, but I don't see him being able to do enough where he's going to, make them comfortable spending that kind of money on him, because he has clear limitations as a defender. I just don't see those getting that much better this season. He could prove me wrong, but I don't know how likely that is. Could the playmaking improve? Sure, but I'm just not. He would just have to do a lot for the Nets to look at him in the light that he looks at himself in, and I don't think that that's the most likely outcome. So, is there a path? Yes, there's a path, but I just don't view it as a very likely one. Next question: if Sean Marks was a black man with 3 sweeps in his tenure and no 50-win seasons, banners hung, or deep playoff runs for 10 years, a guy who left his franchise ill-prepared to face challenges, would he still be employed? Now, that's a loaded question, and I'm not going to get into like the race conversation of it. Like, I don't really know how that factors in, but I don't think it factors in. But I will say that there aren't many general managers, black or white, I think, with that resume, who would still have a job and be able to go into another rebuild. And that's why I think a lot of fans, media members, NBA people have been surprised that Sean Marks has held on to his job. But I would say that in Sean Marks's case, I think that there are some extenuating circumstances that haven't worked in his favor, that were out of his control. Like, you look at his, success rebuilding the Nets from nothing. He inherited what a lot of people called the worst situation in NBA history in terms of having a team that was completely bereft of young talent, no draft capital or assets whatsoever. And he put together a good spunky team through good, talent identification. And that led to him being able to sign free agents, KD and Kyrie, and then put together what was the best roster in the NBA during that 2021 season. Like, that was a legitimate title favorite. And if it weren't for playoff injuries, if it weren't for COVID, like all of you guys know this, the Nets would probably have a title during that 2021 season. So he did that. And obviously there were things outside of his control that derailed it. I also think that there were things that he did that I don't think helped him, and kind of led to the implosion of this Nets team. Whether you want to talk about the head coach hirings, like the Nets fired Kenny Atkinson and they hired Steve Nash. I think both of those views are now viewed very negatively. Now, you could say that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving played a strong role in those decisions, which we pretty much know they did at this point. But still, maybe that leads itself into a conversation of Sean Marks acquiescing to the stars more than he should have. But that's also a really difficult conversation to get into, because when you have stars and personalities like that, you have to acquiesce to them somewhat. So that didn't work in his favor. I think the head coach hirings were kind of a black mark. But even with that, like, after they fired Steve Nash, the Nets wanted to hire Ime Udoka. They reportedly, like, pretty much had him hired. Shams Charania reported that. And then they were blocked by the NBA because they thought that the NBA wanted Ime to have to sit out for what happened in Boston. And then Ime ends up going to the Houston Rockets. So Sean Marks wasn't able to make that hire, which he reportedly wanted to, which would have been viewed as a good hire by all accounts. And then after that, he hires Jordi Fernandez, who everybody has raved about as a head coach up to this point. So I get why people are surprised he's getting a shot, to enter another rebuild. I get why people look at his resume, one playoff series win, not much success, and would say that he's not, he doesn't deserve to have this shot. But I'd also say that if you just look at what he's good at, he was good. His best thing that he did was rebuilding this team the first time around. And now he's getting another shot to do it with a league-leading asset pool, with all of these draft picks, with his cap space, with these things that he had none of the first time around. So I think that, while it may be strange the way that this is played out, I could see why Joe Tsai thinks that Sean Marks is fit to rebuild this team moving forward. So we'll see how that works out, but it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. And I do think that this front office has done a good job of, going from the implosion of that big three era to setting the Nets up well through the Suns trade, through the Mikal Bridges trade, and, we'll see what happens this season. If they're able to get a top draft pick and land one of these guys like a DeBanster or a Boozer or a Darian Peterson, I think a lot will be forgiven, and I think the future will look really bright moving forward. So we'll see how that plays out. Last question before a break: is the Nets front office more focused on profit over sustainability based on what has happened the last 10 years? Interesting question. I think, I think what you're implying when you say that is that they've gone for the quick fix. They haven't really rebuilt it the right way. But I would say no, because if you look at the KD Kyrie thing that the Nets did, they, signed KD Kyrie. They had that exciting young team. They signed KD and Kyrie in free agency, and then they traded for James Harden. It didn't work out. But if you ask, if you pulled the 29 other general managers in the league and say, would you have signed KD and Kyrie and then traded what the Nets did to get James Harden and form that big three at that time? I think 29 out of 29 would say yes. And I think that, you could see why during the brief moments they were together leading up to and during that 2021 playoff run, they looked like the best team in the league by far. You've heard people throughout the NBA, like Boston Celtics people, after the Nets, beat them, pulverized them during that first round of the 2021 playoffs. They looked at that Nets team and were like, oh my God, if this team stays together, we have no shot for the next 2 or 3 years, zero shot. They're going to dominate everyone. And obviously it didn't work out, but I think every front office would have made those moves that the Nets did. And then since then, I don't think that they've focused more on profit over sustainability, because they've gone into a rebuild and they've been willing to tank last season and now this coming season. So that's how I'm viewing that. And, a lot of front office questions here, a lot of Sean Marks questions, but it's been a really interesting ride, with Sean Marks, and we'll see how it plays out. But I understand both sides of the fence. I understand why there are people who think that he shouldn't be the GM. I understand why Joe Tsai could look at him and say that he's in a good position or he's fit to lead this team into another rebuild based on what he has done before. But we got some more questions about the Nets potentially acquiring some more future draft capital, some fan section stuff, Cam Thomas, and some other things. So I'll get into all that when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Guys, I love how FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays, try player props, and even follow live lines during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode on this Fan Take Friday. Rolling on through all the rest of your takes and questions. Next question: what are the most realistic avenues to acquiring an additional 2026 first-round pick? What teams are the most likely to be looking to upgrade during the season? And would the Nets want their first? What players could garner the Nets a first? That's a difficult question to answer. There's a lot going into that question. I think there's going to be teams who are looking to upgrade throughout the regular season, but it's kind of difficult to project that stuff this far out. Teams are entering the season, they're going to see what they have, and then we'll see if they get in the conversation. I think if the Nets are going to acquire another 2026 first round pick, I think they could trade future picks to get into that 2026 draft. And Nets obviously only have one first round pick in this 2026 draft, which is their own. And then the other drafts, they have multiple picks in a lot of these other ones moving forward. So I could see them, trying to trade for another 2026 first that way. I think you talk about players who can get the Nets first, you look at maybe Nick Claxton is a guy that they move on from. If he, starts really well this season, he might be a guy who has trade value and could get them a late first. Is he going to get them a premium pick? I don't think so. Michael Porter Jr., like if he played really well, but with that contract, I'm not so sure that the Nets will be able to get a good first round pick, but we'll see. Like it's to be determined, but it's kind of tough to project that stuff this far out. Next question. With Kobe Buffkin, do you see the Nets picking up the club option on his contract before the October 31st deadline? I don't. I think it's going to be really tough for Kobe to show anything that would, lead the Nets to make that decision before Halloween. I think that there's going to be a lot of guys ahead of him in the rotation. If the Nets keep him and he makes it through these roster cuts, I would expect him to get minutes at some point throughout the regular season because I think the Nets are going to be tanking, obviously, and they're going to want to see what they have in him. But I see his situation kind of similar to what the Nets did with Zaire Williams, where he's a reclamation project, a former lottery pick or near former lottery pick. He was one pick after the lottery, but I see, they bring him in. If he shows promise the way that Zaire did, they'll have the financial flexibility and the space to extend him next summer without picking up that team option. That's kind of how I see it. It's a little bit of a wait and see game with Kobe Buffkin. Next question. There are a lot of Cam Thomas type players also in the final year of the contract. Anthony Simons, Colin Sexton, Shaedon Sharpe, etc. Are any of them a better fit than Cam for this team? Should the Nets pursue any of them in free agency? I mean, are any of them a better fit? Like, I don't know. Like, Shaedon Sharpe's a different player than Cam Thomas, but he's a poor 3-point shooter. I don't see the Nets having interest in him. Colin Sexton, like undersized guard. I don't think the Nets want to go that route. Anthony Simons, like a similar player to Cam Thomas. Like, I just think when you don't like a player archetype, I don't see why the Nets would, want to get back into that business at the money that some of these guys are going to be looking for. Now, if they can get Cam back or they can get an Anthony Simons or somebody like that at a discounted rate, maybe then the Nets would have interest. But these guys are going to be looking for big contracts. We know Cam Thomas is looking for a big contract. I just don't see them getting back into that at that number because they made a clear decision this offseason that they didn't want to be in that market at that price point. So why would that change? I just don't see it change. I don't see it changing. I think one of these other guys would have to come down on what they're asking for a lot, and the market would really have to not be there. And then maybe the Nets get them at a discounted rate. But the Nets just drafted all these ball handlers. Like they brought in Yegor Dioman, they brought in Ben Saraf, Nolan Shore, like Danny Wolf. Like they've talked about wanting to have sizable multi-positional guys, pass first guys. Like that is the mold that they're targeting. And I think that you have to kind of project that out to how they're going to operate in trades and free agency. So I don't really see those guys being targets for the Nets, especially at the kind of money that they're going to want to get. Last couple questions, rolling on through them quick. Fun question. I'm assuming you play fantasy. Who do you have on your roster? Any Nets? I do not play fantasy basketball. More of a fantasy football guy. I don't have time for fantasy basketball with I know that you can do it like weekly lineups or whatever. Some people do it every day, but you just have to update it a lot. And, I've never played fantasy basketball and I'm not really into it. So, I don't have any of these Nets on your roster. If you could get a Cam Thomas or a Michael Porter Jr., I would get those guys just from the standpoint of they're going to be taking a lot of shots. Last one, I'll just do one that no one is thinking or will say, but DeAnthony Melton, as a 7-year vet playing with a ton of good guards, could have actually helped this year for development, and I wouldn't have minded bringing him back if he was open to it. Yeah, it's DeAnthony Melton. Like, he's a fine player. The Nets have other veterans. I don't think that they needed to bring another veteran back. I just don't think that really made a lot of sense with their situation. So I wouldn't be losing too much sleep over that. But that's all we have, all the questions. Thank you to everyone again. As I always thank you every time we do this. You submitting questions, you participating, it means a lot. If I didn't get to your question, I apologize. I got to most of them. I try to get to all of them, but have a time limit on this podcast. But if you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy the content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But we got the Nets regular season coming up. We're going to have a preseason finale later today on this Friday, and then we got the season opener on Wednesday. So I'm going to have coverage of all that and more leading up to that regular season opener when I'm back on Monday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.